Okay, welcome to Racial and Ethnic Minorities. This is the class for Wednesday, as well as the class for Friday. So we're going to talk about the sociological imagination, and we're also going to talk about theory and methods. So there was no reading for theory and methods, but we're just going to talk about that to help set the stage for how we are going to discuss race, essentially, and race in the United States and in a global context. And so I think it's important to start with sociological imagination because there are a lot of different ways in which we can go about this topic, right? If you were taking this from an historian who was talking about race, which we are going to add some historical perspectives, like a short history of race. I think you read that in this class. We're going to talk about George Frederickson's work, which is very historical, right? There are other aspects, right, of race that come from, like, even Ta-Nehisi Coates. I don't know if we're going to read it, but the case for reparations, right, is very much historical, as well as he does a lot of economics as well, and looking at the case for reparations. And so there's different ways in which people will discuss race, right? And people will discuss ideas around race. If you were to take it from a political scientist or from a psychologist, then you might read works like Judy Katz. What was Judy Katz's work? I forgot the name of it, but I know in it she argues that racism is essentially a mental illness, right? So all these different ways in which people talk about race. And so as a sociologist, this is my vehicle into teaching this kind of class. And so I provide kind of a sociological foundation and use a lot of sociological theories to explain it. And I know people in this class may be coming from various disciplines, various backgrounds and schools of thought. And so I just want to kind of start off by saying this is the school of thought in which I present this. However, I do believe in being interdisciplinary. I do believe in being very inclusive of many different ways of thinking and many different philosophies in order to get at this problem of racism and to discuss the discourse of race. So I'm open to those. But yeah, as a sociologist, I start with sociology. And my goal is to activate your sociological imagination, and you can take this and then you can apply it however you need to your own school of thought or your own discipline. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today. And then theory and methods we're going to talk about as well to discuss how people came up with the writings that they have. So I do think one thing that's very important, especially when talking about class, especially in doing sociology courses, I think not enough talk is on the methods. And that's probably because you take a methods course for that. So it's just kind of assumed that, oh, these people use the right methods in order to come to these conclusions. However, what I found is that, and which I think is really good about millennial students and students like yourselves, and maybe consider post-millennial, is that those kind of questions are asked, and typically those weren't asked, particularly in my generation when I was in college. Very rarely did people really ask about the methods on how people came to these certain conclusions. And so I think, and though this is not a methods course, so I don't go deep, and you more than likely will not even read a whole lot about the methods from how these people came up with their conclusions, I do want to let you know that this is not just people thinking and pontificating. This is empirical evidence. These are scientific conclusions that came from interviews, that came from statistical analysis, that came from demographical assessments, that comes from that comes from the scientific method, right? And so that is where a lot of these conclusions come from. And so one can question that, and that's perfectly fine. I don't mind a person questioning the data, but I do want to just say out and upfront that this is science. And so my way of saying that out upfront that this is science is by doing the theory and methods section to let you know, yeah, this is not just people talking. but this is actual science. These theories are actually tested, and these are the results and the conclusions. And one can agree or disagree with the conclusions, but I just don't want it to be said that this was not scientific. So with that being said, let's go into it. So first thing, sociology, right? What is sociology? So sociology gives us a conceptual framework, right? If we go into this next slide, it gives us a conceptual framework that allows us to think about how the increasing flow and embracing of goods and services, money, people, technology, information, culture, how all those things shape meanings, identities, and social relationships. Okay. Essentially, when you think about the basis of society, and the basis of survival is economics, essentially, right? People have to survive. People have to find ways to make money, to make a living. Before there was money, there were, fine resources, particularly food. So there was a time where really your whole job was to continue to eat food so that you can continue to live, right? And then after a while, it wasn't just about living, it was about living at different degrees. Were you going to be rich? Were you going to be kind of well off? Or were you going to be poor? Really, it was mostly rich and poor at that time. So you had to, that was the degrees to which people understood social life. And so the basis of that was access to resources, access to when money became a thing, money. And so when you think about before money was the way in which we interacted and understood how to advance ourselves, what was the first means of obtaining anything before money, right? The first meaning or the first way in which we obtained anything, the first kind of economic strategy, the first economic principle was bartering, right? You buy and sell, not buy and sell, but you create and then you exchange your excess. Okay, so you buy, you barter, meaning if I'm running a nation and I have an excess of gold, maybe not gold, let's say oil, and you're running a nation and you have an excess of silk, and I know my people love silk and your people need oil, we're going to trade, right? And so that's essentially what the what the idea of engaging in the exchange of goods was, right? We're exchanging the goods that we have, the excess of goods that we have. In addition to the exchanging of the excess of goods, also what you have is services. So if I can't give you, let's say, the oil that I typically have every season doesn't come in this time, all right? But you still need silk because your people still demand silk, all right? And so, or no, I'm sorry, my people still need silk, sorry, because you're giving me silk, I'm giving you oil. So my people still want silk, your people still want oil, but I don't have the oil. So you're not going to give me as much silk as I will for oil. Maybe for every 5 barrels of oil, you give me 5 pounds of silk or something, right? However we do it. But if I can only give you 2 barrels of oil, you might only give me 2 pounds of silk. And I'm like, man, I need more than that if I make money this season. So then you might say, okay, well, listen, I'll give you 5 pounds of silk if you give me 2 barrels of oil and you give me 300 of your best men because I'm getting ready to go to war. And I don't have enough men in my country to fight these people off. Give me 300 of your best men, right? So not only are we exchanging goods, now we're exchanging services, right? Or I'm looking to expand my infrastructure. Give me 200 of your best builders so I can expand my infrastructure. Cool. Give me those 5 pounds of silk. I'll give you 2 barrels of oil, and I'll give you 200 of my best builders. So again, it's all about the exchange of what is necessary for expansion. And so at first it was the barter system, right? Where we would exchange goods, and not only goods, but we would exchange services. Well, what's happening as people are exchanging goods and exchanging services in the ancient times? Well, eventually somebody says, listen, having to love, because it's not just 5, 10 pounds, you're talking about 100, 150, 500 pounds of gold, of rice, of, whatever, being transported all over Europe, Asia, and Africa. And so somebody eventually says, listen, there's got to be a better way, because we use all these camels, we're using all these elephants, we're using all these rhinoceroses to get people from point A to point B. Remember, these people don't have cars, they don't have planes, so they got to lug all, and I mean, you've seen pictures, they got to lug all this stuff on whatever animal they're using, and they got to travel all the way to wherever they're going. They got to pick up, make the exchange, travel all the way back. It's a lot. Somebody says, hey, why don't we just have something that represents resources as opposed to actually going back and forth with this gold, this silver, this, if it's oil or if it's ore or if it's coal or whatever, right? So I don't even know if oil existed during that time. That might not be a good example, but I guess I mentioned it did. They had oil lamps. But yeah, so this idea of money became a thing. So instead of going back and forth, we would just use money to take care of all of our needs, and we would use money to purchase. So this money is representation for goods. The more money you have, the more goods you can purchase. That's better, and we can just put the money in our pockets, right? So as people begin to increase and embrace this notion of money, now more people are starting to interact with each other. As people are exchanging goods and services, as money is being made, more people are starting to interact with each other. Wow. Okay, I come to your country, we're exchanging, and I notice, wow, your people, it seems like 5 times a day, your people, they get on their knees and they pray. Why is that? Oh, that's because we are a Muslim country and they're praying to Allah. Who's Allah? Oh, that's what we call God. Oh, okay. Well, we call God Jehovah, right? Oh, that's interesting. Okay. And so now there's an exchange of ideas. Now there's an exchange of culture, right? Now people are exchanging. Now people, hey, can you come and talk to my people about Allah? And hey, can you come and talk to my people about Christianity? Now you also have the intermarrying of people as people are trading. Uh-oh, she's cute, he's cute, right? We can add this wife, that wife, right? So there's intermarrying, there's intersex involved when people are starting to interact with other people based on economy, based on value, based on expansion of wealth. Also, you have the creation of technology. Creation of technology. So now people are saying, hey, every time I come to your country, oh, you all do things this way. Oh, wow, that makes this a lot easier. Let me can I get the blueprint and take that back to my country? Maybe I can make some money. Vice versa. So now as people are intermarrying, as people are coming into contact with each other, they're exchanging information, they're exchanging religion, they're exchanging culture, they're exchanging ideas. And now this exchange shapes meaning. Now my life means more, my culture may mean more or less to me or others because of interacting with this other group. Now identity is starting to be shaped. Now my nationality has more meaning because this nationality has a different name. And to some people, it could provide a sense of pride, a sense of nationalism. But sometimes nationalism can lead to war. So we got to be careful with identity, because people will die or kill other people or wipe out an entire nation because of identity. Racial identity, gender identity, sexual identity. So identities can be dangerous. It can be beautiful, but it can be dangerous. And then lastly, you have social relationships. How people come together, how they interact, both in a positive and a negative way, both in a way in which is peaceful and a way that which leads to conflict. And so how all of these things occur, from the bartering to the increasing of goods and services to the money and people, all that, all the way to the social relationships, this is what sociology studies. This is what sociology looks at. How all this happened, how people interact with each other, and how that interaction between each other or their environment shapes what things mean, how things identify, and how people relate to each other. Okay. So sociology, so that's essentially what sociology is. Now that's the long version. Short version is sociology is this scientific study of human activity and the way forces influence or pressure people to behave, respond, or think in certain ways. Right. So first of all, sociology is a scientific study. And in addition to that, sociology is based off the understanding and the influence of social forces. We're going to talk about what social forces are in a second. But influence of social forces, and then how social forces move people to behave in a certain way, both good and bad or indifferent, respond or think in certain ways. So then the question is, well, then what is a social force? Social forces are anything that we create, we meaning human beings, create that influence the way people behave, respond, or think. That's a social force. Anything that humans create that influence the way we behave, respond, or think. And this human activity that occurs as a form of this influence are things like working, getting food, competing for scholarships. All this is human activity. Falling in love, having sex, winning, losing, consuming. All of these things are examples of the human activity that sociologists study. Okay. So these social forces created by humans influence behavior, responses, thought patterns. We'll come back to social forces in a hot second. But before we do that, I want to ask you a question. How many of you like biographies? Just biographies. It could, and some of you may not read a lot. I don't know if reading is as popular. So I'll even say if you watch biopics. Some people say biopics, some people say biopics, which is basically just movies about people's lives. So just think about it if you like it. Also think about your favorite one. And if we were together, I would ask you to say your favorite ones. Think about your favorite one. I know for me, I love biographies. Biographies, biopics are my favorite. Matter of fact, I was watching one this morning. I still didn't finish it. It was a documentary. But I love looking at people's lives. I love learning about people's lives. I just think it's fascinating. I think it's really, really fascinating, which is probably why I'm a sociologist. But a biography looks at people's lives. And some of my favorite biography that I've read, that I will read over and over again, is the autobiography of Malcolm X. I think it's phenomenal. Anybody, if you've never read it, you absolutely should read it before you graduate. The autobiography of Malcolm X, absolutely. So yeah, some of my favorite biographies that I've read. I mean, I've read so many, I can't even think of them now. Oh, Serena Williams' father, Venus and Serena's father. That was a really good one too. I think it's called My Life in Black and White or something like that. It's really, really good. Rabbit is another one. Um, this young lady, she was um, a hustler in the South, in Atlanta. That was a really good one. What other bios do I like? Um, yeah, a bunch of them. And then some of my favorite biopics, like movies, are I like Malcolm X, the movie Malcolm X. I also like Ray, so I like a lot of music biopics. I really like Bohemian Rhapsody is one of my favorites. I love Bohemian Rhapsody because I'm a big Queen fan. Um, what else? Yeah, any kind of music, Straight Outta Compton. I really like that one too. So a lot of them. I like a lot of music biopics. So anyway, um, from a sociological perspective, people's lives are shaped by society. So what made these stories interesting? Right? What made these biopics interesting was not just what happened in their lives, because typically somebody's not going to make a movie about your life unless something interesting happens, right? So if you talk about Malcolm X, this man, he was born in like the Midwest, kind of South. Um, his father was murdered by the Ku Klux Klan. His mother had to go to an insane asylum. He became a drug dealer. He became a pimp, and then he went to jail and converted to this religion and became this famous Black leader. And he scared all these white people. And so, and then he converted and started to change his ideas to some degree. I don't want to go into too much detail and get off track, but began to change his ideas and basically push forth this notion of Black nationalism and expanded it, right? Interesting story, right? Or even if we were to go to, let's say, Queen, Bohemian Rhapsody, right? This kind of middle class rock band. Were they in England? I think they were in England. Middle class rock band in England just explodes to be one of the greatest, musical acts of all time. But what makes these stories interesting is not just what they did, but when they did it. Meaning what was going on in society at that time to make what they did so phenomenal, right? If we look at the movie Ray, I don't know if y'all have ever seen that. I know we're in different generations, but the movie Ray is a movie about Ray Charles. For those who may not know who Ray Charles is, he was a soul singer, R&B singer. He was blind and he could play the piano really well. And he could sing really well. And he became like this pop superstar. And Ray Charles, to become a pop superstar, and he was blind and Black from the South, it's a big deal. It's like, how did you do that? But it's not just what he was able to do, when he was able to do it. This was done in the 1930s, 40s, 50s. All right. So to become so successful in music, and not only that, but negotiate deals that even white people weren't getting. He got a better deal than Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra was a blue-eyed white man that could sing really well. And this Black man got a better deal than him. That's a problem. What's going on? So how he was able to do what he was able to do, but then when he was able to do it. Straight Outta Compton, a rap group out of California. There's nothing significant about that. But what they were able to overcome, the LA riots, police brutality, poverty, to become successful, right? So it's not just about your story. It's about the social forces that shape your story. The social forces that shaped Ray Charles's story was poverty, racism. The stories that shaped Queen's story was nationality, the rise of HIV and AIDS. That was a key part to the story, right? The things that shape Straight Outta Compton, racism, police brutality, right? And this genre of hip hop that was really taboo at the time. Got people in a lot of trouble, could get people killed. And so these larger social forces that were created by human beings, racism created by human beings, police brutality created by human beings, intersecting with a person's life story. So if you think about you growing up during this time period, your story, probably very interesting, cool. But if somebody's going to do a movie on your life, it's not just about what you've overcome. It's also about when you overcame it during the age of social media, during the age of COVID-19, during the age of social unrest, the summer protests of 2020. These are the social forces, all created by human beings, but all of these are activities that were created by human beings that influence how you were able to navigate life. And so these are examples of how social forces and how they intersect with one's life teaches us and gives us the sociological imagination necessary to assess social life. And so sociological imagination is essentially the intersection of history and biography. When history and biography come together, that's what you get. So when we think about social forces, what are they? Well, we talked about racism, poverty, but even if you look at something as simple as a smartphone, right? Smartphone. Mine's old, it's a raggedy case. Raise your hand if you created the smartphone. Some people might say, well, I gave feedback that helped to create the smartphone. Probably, maybe, not really. Now, raise your hand if you were actually there in the lab making the first smartphone. Probably not. But how much does a smartphone influence your life? A lot. A lot, right? What do you do on your smartphone? Everything. Banking, movies, music, art, editing, communication, read, homework. You might be watching this on your smartphone. You do everything on your smartphone. So smartphones are very, very, very important. And smartphones is a social force because it's something that humans created that influence the way you live. And so essentially, sociological imagination gives us the quality of mind that helps us make sense of these forces, that helps us understand what's going on in the world and helps us to understand what may be happening in the world that is affecting us on a personal level. It gives us the ability to explore similarities and differences, particularly differences and similarities between things like troubles and issues. Troubles and issues. I talked about that in the reading. The difference between troubles and issues. What is a trouble versus an issue? Something I want you to think about. What is a trouble versus an issue? Trouble is something that we deal with on a personal level, on an individual level, individual shortcomings. Those are troubles. Those can be traced back to larger, or those can be traced back to something within ourselves. An issue can be traced back to larger social issues that should be understood from a past personal efforts and abilities. So let's think of some examples. I want you to think of some examples. You can pause, think of some examples, and then come back. But when I think of like a trouble and an issue, a trouble would be if I were to come in front of you, come in front of a class, this class, and I were to say, you know what, you guys, I've been looking all over and I cannot find a job anywhere. I can't find a job. I'm unemployed. And I've been trying, I really have, but I can't find one. What might be your response? Well, Dr. Grant, you may not be looking hard enough. Or you may not be qualified. Or you might be looking in the wrong area. Maybe you should apply for these jobs and not these jobs. There's a lot of things that you're doing that are making it difficult for you as an individual to get a job. I might say, okay, let me take that advice. But an issue is if I were to come to you with, and I'm a Black male, and I have 49 other Black males that look just like me or similar to me, various educational backgrounds, various social classes, various looks. But the thing we have in common is that we're Black males. And we say we can't find jobs. Spans from people who didn't graduate high school all the way up to people who have doctorates, law degrees, professional degrees, terminal degrees. And we all say we can't find jobs. Is that a trouble? Are you gonna say, man, all of y'all need to look in different places? Is, yeah, you might want to switch up your resume a little bit, maybe change up your, no. Because now you're gonna say, oh, wait a minute, something's wrong. All of these people can't be having the same problem. And it be an individual problem. No, something else is wrong. There's something in society. We don't know exactly what it is. Now we're gonna have to test it to see, but it looks like there's something in society that's stopping people that look like these people from getting jobs. Is it a race thing? Is it a gender thing? Is it a region thing? We don't know, but we know it's something bigger. It's not just these individuals. That's an issue. First one is a trouble. Dr. Grant, you can't find a job. All right. Second one is an issue. Something's going on. And so an example would be many of you all were young during this time, but you might still remember. Right before Trayvon Martin was murdered, and even when Trayvon Martin was murdered, there was still, in 2010, 2011, I can't remember, there was still talk that Black people were exaggerating police brutality, exaggerating the fact that they were being hunted by law enforcement, by many law enforcement officers. And so many people still feel like, oh, this is exaggerated. And Trayvon Martin was just propaganda. They use this one example to say, look at what's happening to all Black men. It's not. But then after a while, you got Oscar Grant, Sean Bell, Trayvon Martin, Jonathan, forgot his name, Jonathan Edwards, I think. Crawford, forgot his first name, last name was Crawford. Mike Brown, and then the list just goes on. Renika McBride, and the list just goes on. And these are people from various, some live in the South, some live up North, some live in California, some live in Midwest, some live in all over the place. And then sometimes it even got to where it was mostly Black men, but some Black women. And then when it happened to the little boy in Cleveland, I'm bad with names, forgot his name. Right? And then it was happening to people from various class groups. Trayvon Martin came from a middle class family. Mike Brown came from a poor and working class family. Right? Oscar Grant came from a poor and working class family. The guy who got choked in New York, maybe poor and working class. Other people came from middle class. So everybody's coming from different families. Jordan Davis, that happened right in Jacksonville. Wasn't a police officer, but that happened in Jacksonville, right? The murder of a Black boy. And so now people are saying, oh, wait a minute. Maybe it's not just one. Maybe it's not just a trouble. Maybe this is a bigger issue. And then that's when you have the expansion of Black Lives Matter and that movement to show that this is not just a trouble. This is not just one-off situations that's happening to these boys and girls or men and women that are disrespecting authority. This is a bigger issue. There is literally there's a bias by the criminal justice system towards Black men and women and Black boys and girls, and it needs to be addressed. And so that's essentially the difference between a trouble and an issue. So those who possess the sociological imagination help us better understand the differences between these troubles and issues and parse through the issues to help reveal them and deal with them. People who have the sociological imagination, they understand their own life, they understand their place, their experiences in a larger social and historical context. And so this allows us who have the sociological imagination to see that it's not just them that may share certain positive or negative experiences, but once we have an understanding of larger social forces, then we can correlate our experiences with each other and with what is happening in society, and then that gives us a better chance of actually solving these issues, right? That gives us a better chance of solving these issues. The person who came up with this idea of the sociological imagination was C. Wright Mills during the time that Charles Lamert calls the second age of social theory, 1950s going into the 60s. Okay. And he came up with this idea to help explain how sociologists think, how they think, and how they're able to activate this sociological imagination to explain the world in which we live. Okay. And so when we look at sociology and when it came to be, we see that sociology emerged as a way of understanding the Industrial Revolution. What's the Industrial Revolution? Anybody remember? The Industrial Revolution was that time period in Western life where you start to see the mechanization of society. It was that time period where modernity, well, it's the age of modernity, and it is that transition from Western life, meaning the United States and Europe, being mostly agrarian to mostly industrial. The rise of factories, the expansion of the urban core, right? These things start to transform society. Now less people are working on farms and more people are working in factories. This is also the rise of inequality. This is where you get Rockefeller, Steele, Carnegie, Vanderbilt. All right, this is where you get these people. So the Industrial Revolution is that time period in American life that, and Western life in general, where we're becoming more modern. And philosophers during this time are saying, because social theory has been going on for a while, but philosophers during this time are saying, now, wait a minute. Just because this is happening, just because life is changing in this way, we're seeing that there's this disruption that's going on in our society. Because men are not farmers anymore, they're not working in factories. To the untrained eye, to the mind that does not have this sociological imagination activated, it just looks like people going off to work. But those of us with a sociological imagination are saying, uh-oh, the family's disrupted. Because now the father is going away to get money. That means the basis of the economy is not in the home, which is going to depreciate the role of the mother and increase Gender inequality, watch. And sure enough, it did just that. Gender inequality increased as we move to the Industrial Revolution. Also, whoa, if everything is mechanized and now our economy is becoming more centralized into whatever is whoever owns the factories, as opposed to decentralized, meaning who owns the farms, who owns the farmlands, and it's kind of more spread out, it's more compartmentalized. Class inequality is going to increase. It's going to lead to wars. That's what Marx said. Watch. Sure enough, it did. World War I, World War II. Some people would argue Marx foresaw that. So these philosophers now, sociologists, are now saying we need to look at what's happening here. This isn't just something we need to skate by. We need to talk about it. Weber's Protestant ethics, spirit of capitalism. We need to talk about it. Something's wrong. Spirit of capitalism, he's saying the spirit of morality is done now because of capitalism, and then it is being used to feed religious ideas. It's even more harmful. So now you're supporting greed through God, and that's supposed to be separate. So sociologists are the ones that are noticing these transformations and saying, we need to look at this. And this is where you get the people we're getting ready to talk about in theory and methods. We'll talk about them in a second. But anyway, just want to give you this historical background. So the Industrial Revolution is occurring, and what that's doing is that's changing the way goods and services were produced. So before, again, you got barter, you got money, goods and services were produced at a very modest speed. Now it's expansion. With industry, right, you got more and more people who are working in factories. Now it would take a day to crank out, or a couple of days, maybe a week to crank out now what you can do in a couple of hours. Services are being produced. Now, actually, some services are no longer needed because now you got machines doing it. So now the element of work is different. What is seen as significant is different. Ideas of space and time. Before the railroad, it'll take you months to go from Florida to Oklahoma. Months. Now, a couple of days. Hop on the train. Ideas of space and time, much different now. Now, colonial power is expanding. Because now, in the age of European expansion, European countries are having more control, and they're using that control to keep control. So they don't want the underserved and undervalued, sometimes we call them third world countries, to get access to this and make money. So we need to colonize them so that they never can have the opportunity to surpass us. Because if we don't, they will. They're smart. So then they start to colonize these places. Now you got to work, and whatever work you do, you got to give to the mother country, Mother Europe. And not only are we going to colonize you financially, we're also going to colonize your mind. We're going to educate you in a certain way. We're going to colonize your religion, your churches, your mosques. We're going to colonize your spirituality. And so this shows us the rise of capitalism. Out of the Industrial Revolution, capitalism is off the charts now. That's why they had to make monopolies illegal and everything. So capitalism is rising and expanding because of the Industrial Revolution. And it is out of understanding this that we get sociology. It is out of understanding this that departments of sociology start to arise in the late 19th and early 20th centuries in universities like Chicago School, Atlanta School, all over the world. Because people are questioning the morality of what's happening. People are questioning the good and the bad of it all. And that's where you get the Department of Sociology, and that's where you get sociologists. And so that is the medium for which we will be discussing a lot about race. through this lens. I just want to give you that background. So just to give you an example of the sociological imagination, what you can do is you can go to the next slide, which says activity fleshing out sociology. And for the next few minutes, I want you to answer these few questions. Well, actually, we'll do it together here. So you're not going to turn in anything. You don't have any assignments or anything. But I think what I want to do, we can do that right here. So let me share the screen. And so when we look at sociology and activating our sociological imagination, I like to use this as an example, right? So this is something that everybody does. Everybody uses the bathroom. But using the bathroom even takes sometimes our sociological imagination and takes a type of social theoretical analysis that we probably didn't realize that we actually used. There are certain social rules around using the bathroom that we don't even realize. All right. For example, so let me make sure. Hold on. Okay. For example, somebody walks in the bathroom. Urinal 1, urinal 2, urinal 3 is open. Which one are they going to use? Probably say urinal 3. And you're right. Urinal 3. Why? Because that's the one that most people think is the cleanest. Oh, everybody's going to use urinal 1. I'm going to go all the way to urinal 3. I'm the smart one. No, because everybody thinks that. Science actually says that's the dirtiest of the urinals. Everybody goes to urinal 3. But that's typically where people go. All right, someone walks in the bathroom, urinal 3 is occupied. Where do they go? Anybody can answer. More than likely, you said 1. Why? I don't want somebody next to me while I'm using the bathroom. No. I like my space. Or I don't want nobody looking at me. I'm in a vulnerable position. I'm using the bathroom. They might look at me. They might think I'm gay. Right? These kind of thoughts come into people's heads. But whatever the case is, most people know, well, somebody's at 3, I'm going to go to 1. And that's the correct answer. What about if somebody's at 1 and 3? What do? They hold it? Sure. Some people may go anyway, a few. But then if you go anyway, I usually don't talk about this part. If you do go to 2 anyway, what's the rule? Put your head up. Right? Put your head up and use the bathroom. And then finish and do what you got to do. So there are rules that all of us know, even though we all come from different places, different backgrounds. We all know the rules around the bathroom. Some people will hold the fact they got to use the bathroom, they'll hold their pee just to follow the social rules. They would defy the biological rules because you're not supposed to do that because that can cause bladder infection later on in your life. You're not supposed to hold your pee, but they do that anyway to follow the social rules. Now, where did we get these rules from? Who sat you down and said, these are the rules for the bathroom? Nobody told me that. I cannot tell you how I knew those answers. You can't either. More than likely, there was no book, there was no test exam that you had to take. Why? You just know. And understanding these rules, as silly as they are, these are social rules that we follow. And we probably wouldn't have even thought about that had we not just activated our sociological imagination to think, man, why do we follow these rules? That doesn't even make sense. How do we all know this? That's our socialization. And recognizing our socialization and recognizing the effects of our socialization helps us to strengthen our sociological imagination. And that is what we're going to do throughout this semester. Throughout this semester, we're going to use our sociological imagination to help make sense of our racial interactions. Okay, so that is sociological imagination. Now we're going to head over to theory and methods. This is for Friday, for your reading for Friday. And here we talk a little bit about sociology, theory, and methods, and particularly the practice, the science of sociology, right? So I'll give you some time to go ahead and get that together, and then we will spend the next few minutes discussing this. All right, so let's go through the theory and methods really quickly. A lot of this you probably already know. Some of it you may not. But we'll get to it, okay? So first, the sociological perspective. We talked about this already. What is sociology? The study of human activity, the way social forces influence or pressure people to behave or think or respond in a certain way. And so sociology essentially studies certain groups. It studies groups rather than the individual, right? So psychology kind of focuses more on the individual, right? Psychological development, blah, blah. Sociology says, no, we're not just going to study the individual. We're going to study the groups this individual belongs to, right? So psychologists will look at me and say, okay, what has Jonathan been through in his life to make him blah, 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 blah. Study that. Study his brain, study his development. Sociologists said, no, yeah, I mean, that's fine. That's important. But he belongs to the male group. So we need to study his experiences as a male. He belongs to the African-American, the Black group. We need to study his racial experiences. He'd be considered middle class. So we need to study his middle class experiences. But we also need to look at the intersection of it all. So as a Black male in the middle class in the United States, what does that mean? We need to study that group. So we need to study the groups, not just the person and who they are. Sociologists also use the scientific method beyond common sense. So prior to theory and methods, prior to sociology, most people use either common sense or religion to explain life. And then the scientific method came about and people are like, no, we can't just say, well, the gods did this, or if a woman has twins, she's evil. Like, we got to move past that. Let's actually try to prove this stuff through empirical evidence, through observation, through science. We live in groups and groups affect our lives. These are the things that sociologists believe. It's not just about us, it's about the groups that we're connected to, the groups that we represent and the groups that represent us, and what people think about those groups and how people feel and how that affects our personal lives. So these are the parts of the sociological perspective that are important. And so these people, Darwin, Marx, Nietzsche, Spencer, Durkheim, Weber, these are the people who are seen as the founders, the fathers of social theory, of social thought, sociological thought. Right? Du Bois is absolutely one of them, but He's oftentimes not seen as the father of sociology. So we are fixing that. Newer generation of sociologists are fixing that, largely because of the work of Alden Morris, who's part of an older generation than I am, but absolutely helped to elevate that. And so we look at sociological theory, we see that goes with, typically is assigned earlier people to Marx, Durkheim, and Weber, right? They're called the big three. Now, Auguste Comte is not one of the big three. He's not one of the big three. He gave sociology its name. He was the one that said the study of people and the study of the way in which people interact with each other is called sociology, but he is not one of the big three. And so Auguste Comte says that sociology studies human constructions, ideas, inventions, behaviors, and the way people interact with society. And the conclusions about society, he said, he's a positivist. So he says these things should be gathered through the scientific method. Again, just look at people and make up conclusions or come up with things based on what we deem as common sense. Just like we use the scientific method for biology, we use the scientific method for psychology, we need to use the scientific method to study people. And what are some of the ways in which we do that? Well, observation, just by looking. Now, it's not just looking, but using looking, observation. That's one of the things that we use. Experimentation. So we manipulate factors, we manipulate variables, right? Manipulating variables to help come up with conclusions. Comparison. So we look at one thing, then we look at another thing. Comparison is actually the first method that was used. That's the method Marx, Weber, Durkheim used. Du Bois is the father of sociology because he's like, you can't just compare it. You got to actually interview people. We have to actually take a sample, triangulate your data. Don't just use one, don't just use observation. Triangulate your data and make sure that all the data points give you the same conclusion. That'll strengthen your argument. Du Bois was the first to do that. Black man, first Black man to graduate from Harvard with a Ph.D. All right, historical research. Analyzing past events in order to understand the present. Du Bois was good at that too, and Marx. Okay. So it's very, very, very important that we understand that this is a scientific method. This is a scientific, or the scientific method is used to come up with conclusions through this discipline. So if we go to Marx, what did Marx contribute? Right. And the reason why we're going over all this is because everything that we're going to talk about in terms of race is going to be built off a lot of what you're going to hear and see in this section. Marx, part of the big three, first of the big three. Number one, I always like to mention that he worked with Engels. Engels doesn't get enough love. Everybody always talks about Marx and doesn't talk about Engels. Engels was the one financing all of Marx's, books and everything he was talking about. So I always like to give a shout out to Engels. He was the one that came up with conflict theory. He believed that it was the means of production and how it was being divvied out was causing conflict in our society. And this conflict would then be used to help shape our society. So as people argue and fuss and fight with each other, these are the things that are going to help move us into a better world. The conflict between the exploited and the people doing the exploiting. And a lot of revolutions and changes in society take place because of this moving, because of this exploited class. And it is through this conflict that we move from one historical period to another. Right? So some people may say, well, one of the things that helped move us into the Industrial Revolution fully, maybe some may say the Civil War. Thing that moved us into 20th century modernity was World War II. Some people may, you know what I'm saying? Like it's all these different, there's some kind of conflict, right, that moves us from one age to another. Also, Marx was a heavy critic of capitalism. He believed that the bourgeoisie and the proletariat class were constantly at odds with each other. And the bourgeoisie was always trying to make a profit off of the proletariat to increase their wages. So he spoke up for the proletariat. And he said the proletariat needs to control their wages. Capitalism maximizes production. It ignores the needs of humans. It causes inequality, and it expands unnecessary human labor. And so he believed in giving the power back to the workers, redistributing the wealth and the resources is needed to help benefit the workers. Workers have nothing to lose but their change. And once they realize we have nothing to lose, they're taking everything from us. Now the workers are going to get everything they need and everything that's been taken from them. The workers can't even afford their own labor. Think about the people who make Jordans. Jordans are very, very expensive shoes. The people who make them, can they afford them? No. Workers can't even afford their own labor. But there's this pursuit of profit. The pursuit of profit then drives technology, and that's what lowers the labor costs. So as we want more and more profit, we come up with more and more technology. We need less and less labor, more and more exploitation, more and more economic inequality. So this conflict perspective, next slide, is the most important agent for social change according to Marx and Marxists, right? It explains people who are advantaged and who are disadvantaged. It explains how people promote and protect their privileged position. And it also explains the levels of inequality that exist in our society and how inequality exists, the levels to which it exists. And then it also explains why people push back on it. Second of the big three, Emil Durkheim. He believes in the division of labor and solidarity. He also is one of the ones that helped to push structural functionalist theory, him and Talcott Parsons. Talcott Parsons is, well, you know, I like to talk about Parsons. Sometimes it can get kind of boring, though, to be honest with you. We're not going to get into Parsons. But if you like sociology and sociological theory, you might like it. But the division of labor basically says it is our way of dividing tasks and services between people or groups. So this was done to see how people and groups affect each other and how people can spread out, attack a certain goal, and then come back together. He believed in solidarity. And so for Emil Durkheim, he would say things like, well, solidarity is the way in which we have the system of social ties that bring us together. And so that is what keeps us in cohesion. Marx would say it's conflict. Durkheim would say it's solidarity. Meaning, what makes unemployment bad is not the fact that people aren't making money. Marx would say people aren't making money, they're gonna get mad at the rich because the rich making all the money, and it's gonna be a fight to help make this thing better and more equal. Durkheim is saying no. What's wrong with unemployment is not, I mean, yeah, it's messed up that people aren't making money, but also unemployment disconnects you from the larger society. If you don't have any money, you can't go out with people who do have money, and you don't feel comfortable, but they don't feel comfortable going out with you because they got to pay for you. So if you don't have any money, you are disconnected from certain people. You're disconnected from society. If you're homeless, you're disconnected from being able to do certain things. Maybe being able to vote, right? Maybe being able to participate in society in a way that you should because you don't have a job, because you don't have money. And the more that you are connected to society, the better you feel about yourself. The better society is because now we have more people helping to push for change, especially different types of people. So if the only people that are pushing and advancing society are people who look a certain way, then they're only going to push their agenda. So solidarity is necessary. Solidarity is necessary to help us all be better. And then, so with the functionalist perspective, his argument is that you see society as a set of interdependent parts. And all these parts have to function together to maintain a social balance. And if they don't, then there is social disruption, there is disarray. And we have to figure out, well, what part of society was jacked up so that we can fix this. And then Max Weber is the last part of the big three. He studied society's effects on people's actions and the social forces that motivated these actions. So in the Industrial Revolution and the capitalist society, goals are pursued by the most efficient means possible. This means that people are going to use capitalism, going to exploit people in order to get something done. And his argument is that this causes a spiritual void in our society, partisan ethics, in the spirit of capitalism. That's his argument. He's saying there are 4 types of goals, 4 types of reasons goals are pursued. 1, traditional. People did it in the past. I'm majoring in nursing because my mom is a nurse and my mom's mom was a nurse. I'm majoring in business because my family owns a business. I need to know how to run it. Or affection. Goal is pursued out of emotion. I love it. It's something I'm passionate about. Passionate about people. I want to go into sociology. I want to go into social work. Passionate about dogs. I want to go into biology or animals so I can be a veterinarian. All right. Value rationale. Maybe the means is more important than the end. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X both wanted the same thing. They both wanted freedom, liberation, equality for people. Martin Luther King more for all people. Malcolm X was like, first for my people, and then we can spread it out. But really, he was very much a humanitarian and believed in freedom for everybody. But the means to get to it was different. Malcolm said we can do it the nonviolent way or we can do it the violent way. It doesn't matter to me, as long as it gets done. I prefer the nonviolent way. I don't like violence, just like a lot of people don't like violence. But I'm not gonna allow you to be a threat to me and I don't defend myself. Dr. King says, we need to get to freedom and equality, but it cannot be done through violence. I will not allow violence at all. The only way is through nonviolence. For Dr. King, the value rationale was more important. The value to get to the end was more important than the end itself. And then you got instrumental rationale, which is what Max Weber preaches against. Getting to the end by the most efficient means possible. That means exploiting people, if that means whatever it is. That's what we got to do. Now, while these are the big 3, you also have folks like Jane Addams, right? Early women sociologists who did what these men did, but she actually applied it. A lot of these men just kind of talking, writing fancy books and talking to fancy people. But Jane Addams is like, well, are you building institutions? She built the whole house. She actually helped the people that they were talking about. Marx is talking about the proletariat. She like, I'm living with the proletariat. I'm building institutions for the proletariat. I'm addressing issues like homelessness and unemployment, inadequate housing and working conditions. She dealt with community-based efforts that help women transition out of prostitution into more what would be deemed as moral ways of living. Harriet Martineau, her sociology included an analysis of women's lives. She focused on the issues like marriage and children and religious life and race relations. And a lot of women were in messed up marriages, trapped by marriages, trapped by families, right? She spoke out against racism during a time where most Black people were not. So these are the people that helped to create this discipline, right? Symbolic interactionism. We talked about conflict, we talked about functionalism, and the last one is symbolic interactionism. Those are typically like the main 3 theories that everything else kind of comes under. And so symbolic interactionism is the macro level, it's part of macro level sociology, or can be part of macro level sociology that sees the big picture in the way society influences relationships. And the micro level looks at those small scale interactions, children playing on the playground, professors and teachers and their interactions. Macro looks at urban, city spaces, race, class, these bigger kind of macro perspectives. So symbolic interaction looks at society as a product of these smaller everyday interactions, the symbols that we use to define our reality, right? So that's what symbolic interactionism is. So we talked about the big three. We talked about the three main theories of sociology. And then we talked about some other people that are also part of the foundation of sociology that oftentimes get ignored. And so Comte and Durkheim will fall under functionalism. Marx will fall under Marxism. And then out of Marx, you get Weber and Mead, who will fall under more symbolic interactionism. So is sociology a science? Absolutely. Sociology is a science. It employs systematic methods of investigation. It evaluates theories based on evidence. It's not modeled on the natural sciences, and it studies humans and how humans are fundamentally different. So it's absolutely a science that uses empirical evidence. And how does this help us? It helps us see the world from many different perspectives. It helps us write better. It helps us have more informed policies. Many people use sociologists and their science to help inform policies, why something is needed. Hope 6 policies in the 90s and 2000s was very much a product of William Julius Wilson's science in the 80s. It assesses effects of policies, and it helps us have a better understanding of ourselves and understanding of each other. So we're going to go through this last part rather quickly, because most of this you probably already know, but we're just going to go through it anyway. So social research, okay? Social research tests common sense and people's assumptions, then replace with fact and evidence. So we take these generalizations that we have, these statements about groups of people or things that is based on only a few people or things in that group, and then we test it. And social research uses the entire world, right? The whole world is a sociologist's lab. Every doctor, every ologist has a lab. What is the lab for the sociologist? The entire world. What are the two ways in which sociologists conduct research? Quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative uses numerical data. Qualitative uses observations or descriptive data. Sometimes people do mixed methods. Typically it's done in some type of experiment, whether it's a lab. And the lab could be the world, the lab could be watching people, or the lab could be interviewing people, but there's some type of a lab, and their field research allows it to take place in a natural setting. So a lab would be bringing people into somewhere and then maybe manipulating factors. A classroom can be a lab or whatever. Field research, you're just out just looking and observing. Some people conduct quantitative methods through surveys. So people fill out surveys and then you assign numbers, numerical significance to certain questions, and then you run your assessment. Questionnaire asks a sample population to respond to a series of closed-ended questions, or you have interviews. Those are all qualitative. Surveys will be quantitative. And then you also have other methods as well. You have secondary historical analysis. That was my first method that I used in African-American studies. So you analyze people, persons, or research topics using historical data. Sometimes you may do a case study. You may take a single group of people or a sample size of a single group of people and examine them in an in-depth way, sometimes even longitudinally. So you may examine them now and then 2 years later, and then 3 years later, and then 5 years later, and then 10 years later to see what is the results. What are the results? Methods, natural observation, right? Natural observation, participant observation. Sometimes you just watch people. Sometimes you might actually participate in something and be observing, taking notes to come up with certain conclusions. So these are the ways and methods in which people have used to help come up with the conclusions that we're going to talk about in this class. So first thing that these authors did was, number one, they chose a topic. What do I want to study? Then they looked at what was said about this topic. What does the literature say? You're going to see that in all of these readings. What do other people say about this topic? Because nothing's new under the sun. Somebody looked at it. They may not have looked at it in the exact same way that I am, but somebody's looked at large parts of this topic. What did they say? And now looking at what they say and looking at what I see, I'm gonna come up with a hypothesis. What do I think? Okay. Then I plan out my research. What methods am I going to use to help get the best, to help answer this question? When am I going to do it? How am I going to do it? How am I going to choose my population? All right. Then I go out and get it. I go out and collect my data. And once I collect my data, I analyze my data. And then once I analyze my data, I figure out, what do these things mean? What were the reinforcing thoughts? What were the perpetual ideas? What does that mean in relationship to the literature that I just read? Right? What are the patterns? What are the correlations? What are the causations, even though we're not supposed to get at causality? So we just say relationships. And then what is the conclusion? What can people draw from what I'm getting ready to say? How does this push that literature forward? How can somebody else now read mine and say, oh, I like what he said, I like what she said. Now I'm going to add this to it. Did I prove my hypothesis or disprove my hypothesis? Was my hypothesis correct or incorrect? Either way, it's successful, right? So that is essentially your theory and methods. So I just wanted to go over that to make sure we have that foundational science part. There are no assignments this week, no discussions or anything like that this week, so you don't have to worry about that. But definitely starting next week, you can expect to start having assignments and whatever else is required from this class. So hope you all enjoyed this lecture. Enjoy your week, enjoy your weekend, and I will see you all soon, and hopefully, and you will see me next week.